Ella had lived in the Ade mansion for as long as she could remember. She didn't have a family, no mother to hold her when she cried, no father to protect her. She was just the maid. A girl who worked from morning till night, scrubbing floors, washing dishes, and serving food she was never allowed to eat. The mansion was a palace. Tall glass windows, golden chandeliers, and a swimming pool so big it looked like a lake. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and the sound of laughter and music filled the halls. But for Ella it was nothing but a prison. She lived in a small windowless room at the back of the house, near the kitchen. The room smelled of old rags and the mattress on the floor was thin and hard. Every morning before the sun rose she was up, cleaning, cooking and running errands. And every day she faced Madame Sharon. Madame Sharon was the queen of the mansion. She wore the finest clothes, carried designer bags and had fingers full of diamond rings. But her heart was as cold as ice. "Useless girl. Can't you do anything right?" she would scream, throwing a plate to the ground just to make Ella clean it up. If Ella made a mistake she didn't eat that day. If she was too slow she got a slap. And if she ever dared to talk back she regretted it. The only time Ella ever felt happy was when she sneaked glances at the TV in the living room. She loved watching technology shows, smartphones, robots and futuristic cars. She imagined herself one day working in a place where people respected her, where she could use her mind instead of being treated like a slave. But dreams were dangerous in the Ade mansion. One evening, after a long day of scrubbing the marble floors, Madame Sharon screamed, "My gold necklace! It's gone!" She stormed into the kitchen where Ella was washing dishes. Her sharp eyes scanned the room before they landed on Ella. "You," she hissed, stepping closer. "Where is it?" Ella's heart pounded. "Madam, I don't know," she stammered, confused. A hard slap landed across her face. The kitchen staff gasped but looked away. No one ever defended Ella. "You filthy thief!" Madame Sharon screeched. "I knew you were trouble the moment I took you in. Guards, search her." Ella was frozen as the guards grabbed her arms. They searched her pockets, her tiny room, even shook out the only dress she owned. Nothing. Tears filled Ella's eyes. "Please, I didn't take it," she whispered. But Madame Sharon wasn't listening. She turned to her husband, Chief Ade, a man who barely noticed Ella's existence. "Throw her out," she ordered. "She's a criminal." "Sharon, it's late. She has nowhere to go," Chief Ade said, frowning. "Then let her sleep in the streets where she belongs." Before Ella could say another word, the guards dragged her through the mansion, out the grand front doors and into the cold, rainy night. She stood there, shivering in the rain, staring at the golden gates of the mansion that had been her only home. Now she had nothing. The rain poured hard, soaking through her thin dress. She had no shoes, no money, no place to go. She walked for hours through Victoria Island, past glittering hotels, fancy restaurants and neon-lit skyscrapers. The city was alive, but no one saw her. She passed by happy families eating in warm restaurants, their laughter echoing in her ears. She saw couples holding hands, stepping into sleek, self-driving cars. And then there was her, a homeless girl. Her stomach growled painfully. She had not eaten all day. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. She had to find shelter. But where? She walked down a quiet street, her legs weak, her vision blurry. And then she saw it. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce parked at the side of the road, its engine humming softly. The car was like something from a dream, with shining silver rims and glowing blue lights inside. Ella took one more step. Her body couldn't take it anymore. She collapsed right there beside the car, the cold pavement pressing against her skin. The last thing she saw before she lost consciousness was a man stepping out of the car. A tall figure in a crisp black suit, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at her. And then, darkness. The night had swallowed Ella whole. The streets of Lagos, usually alive with flashing lights and honking cars, now felt cold and empty. The rain had not stopped and each drop felt like tiny needles piercing her skin. She walked with no direction, her feet sore, her stomach twisting in pain. The bright billboards above her flashed advertisements of luxury cars, AI robots and smart mansions, things that belonged to the rich, people like Madame Sharon, people like Jude Williams. But Ella didn't know that yet. She didn't know that in a few minutes her life would take a turn she never expected. She only knew that she was exhausted, that she couldn't go on. Her steps became slow, wobbly, then her body gave up. She fell forward, the cold pavement rushing to meet her. Except, she didn't hit the ground. Her body landed against something smooth, metallic and warm. A car. Not just any car. A black Rolls-Royce, its glossy surface reflecting the streetlights above. It was sleek, modern, with glowing blue lines along the sides and a holographic dashboard inside. The door opened with a soft hiss. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit that looked expensive. His shoes were polished, his face strong and serious, with piercing dark eyes that scanned her like a machine processing data. He didn't look like the kind of man who picked up homeless girls from the streets. But here he was, standing in front of her, staring down at her shivering, half-conscious body. For a moment there was only silence. Then he spoke. "Get in." Ella flinched. She didn't know this man. Was this a trap? A cruel trick? But she had no strength left to run. No other choice. With weak, trembling legs she allowed herself to be guided into the car. The inside was warm. So warm. Soft leather seats. A built-in screen playing soft music. The scent of expensive cologne filled the air. It was the closest thing to heaven she had ever experienced. And then, everything faded to black. When Ella opened her eyes again, she wasn't on the streets anymore. She was lying in a bed. A real bed. Not a hard mattress on the floor, not a cold kitchen tile. A bed with soft blankets and pillows that smelled like fresh roses. She sat up, confused. Where was she? The room was like something out of a dream. A massive glass window stretched across the wall, offering a breathtaking view of the Lagos skyline. Neon lights glowed in the distance, the city alive even in the dead of night. The walls were covered with smart panels, displaying moving pictures, news, weather updates, stock market numbers. A robotic vacuum moved quietly across the floor, cleaning the already spotless tiles. Ella felt like an intruder in a futuristic world. Just then the door slid open with a soft hum. The man from earlier walked in. Jude Williams. Except now he wasn't just a mysterious man in a car. He was the most powerful tech entrepreneur in Nigeria. And he was looking at her like a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. "You're awake," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. Ella scrambled up, gripping the blanket. "Where am I?" she stammered. Jude leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "My house." Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a house. This was a palace made of glass and technology. She shouldn't be here. She didn't belong here. I should go," she mumbled, trying to stand. Her legs wobbled and she nearly fell, but Jude didn't move to catch her. He only watched. "You were half dead when my driver found you," he said, his voice unreadable. "Do you have anywhere else to go?" Ella opened her mouth, but no words came out. Did she have anywhere to go? No. No home. No family. No friends. Only the streets. She swallowed hard. Jude must have seen the answer in her eyes because he sighed and gestured toward the tray on the bedside table. "Eat." Ella hesitated, her hands tightening around the blanket. This felt too good to be true. But her hunger won the battle. She reached out and took a bite of the steaming hot rice. And for the first time in years she tasted happiness. Tears pricked her eyes. She wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead she ate in silence, feeling Jude's gaze on her. Finally he spoke. "What's your name?" She wiped her mouth quickly. "Ella." "And what were you doing on the streets, Ella?" She hesitated. Then softly she said, "I was a maid." Jude didn't react, only nodded. "And?" Ella swallowed the lump in her throat. "They accused me of stealing." "I didn't do it." Jude studied her carefully. "Did you?" Her hands clenched into fists. "No." Something about the way she said it made Jude pause. He wasn't a man who trusted easily, but he believed her. He watched as she lowered her head, the tray now empty. Then he made a decision. "I need a new personal assistant." Ella's head shot up. "What?" Jude tilted his head. "Someone smart. Quick. Someone who can handle pressure. I'll pay well." Ella stared at him. Was he serious? I don't have experience," she whispered. "Then learn." Her heart pounded. A part of her wanted to run. This was too much, too fast. But another part of her, the part that had spent years being treated like a nobody, hungered for something more. She was tired of being at the bottom. She wanted to rise. And for the first time in her life she had a choice. She took a shaky breath. "When do I start?" A small, satisfied smirk crossed Jude's lips. No. Ella had no idea that with this single word she had just stepped into a new world. One that would change her forever. Ella stood in front of the massive glass doors of Williams Tech Systems, her heart hammering inside her chest. She had seen this building countless times on TV. A skyscraper of steel and glass, lined with self-driving cars and security drones hovering above. It was the headquarters of Jude Williams' billion-dollar empire. And now, she was about to walk inside as his personal assistant. Felt like a dream. But it was also terrifying. Her hands tightened around the strap of the handbag Jude had given her. She was no longer wearing her ragged maid's dress. Instead she wore a sleek white blazer, fitted trousers and polished black heels. Her hair had been neatly styled, her face fresh and clean. She looked like a different person. He felt like a fraud. Would they know? Would they look at her and see the orphan girl who used to mop floors? The thought made her stomach twist. A voice pulled her out of her thoughts. Ella, let's go. She turned to see Jude stepping out of his luxury self-driving car, dressed in a sharp black suit, his digital watch glowing blue as he checked the time. Unlike her, he didn't look nervous. He never did. He was powerful, confident, untouchable. Ella swallowed hard and followed him inside. The inside of Williams Tech Systems was even more intimidating. Glass elevators moved silently up and down the towering floors. Holographic assistants floated mid-air, greeting employees by name. Workers in expensive suits rushed through the halls, holding tablet devices and speaking rapidly into their AI earpieces. And now Ella was one of them. Jude led her straight to the top floor. His office was like something out of a sci-fi movie, floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek white desk that projected floating screens, and a massive touchscreen wall displaying graphs and business analytics. He dropped his tablet on the table and turned to her. Your job is simple, he said. You manage my schedule, handle my meetings and make sure everything runs smoothly. Ella nodded quickly. I'll do my best. Jude didn't respond immediately. Instead he studied her for a moment before speaking again. I don't hire people out of pity, Ella. She froze. This isn't charity, he continued. If you can't keep up, I'll replace you. Do you understand? Ella's chest tightened. He understood. This was her one shot. She couldn't mess this up. I understand, she said, her voice firm. Jude nodded. Good. And just like that her new life began. Ella had never worked in an office before. She didn't know how to use high-tech scheduling systems or manage a billionaire's day. But she learned fast. Her first week was brutal. She barely slept, trying to memorize Jude's meetings, his habits, his expectations. She made mistakes. She scheduled a call too late. She sent a document to the wrong department. And each time, Jude's cold stare made her stomach drop. You need to be better, he said one evening after she had messed up a report. Ella bit her lip, forcing back tears. I will, she whispered. And she did. One day everything changed. Jude was in a heated meeting with his executive board. A major deal was falling apart. Their biggest client was pulling out, threatening to sink one of Williams Tech's newest projects. Jude was tense, his hands clasped together as the executives argued. Ella stood at the back of the room, silent, invisible. But she was listening. She had always been good at observing, at thinking ahead. And suddenly an idea formed in her mind. She hesitated. He was just an assistant. But she had worked too hard to stay silent. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. Excuse me, she said. The room fell silent. Jude's sharp eyes turned to her. The executives looked shocked. Who was this girl? Why was she speaking? But Ella ignored their looks. She turned to the client on the screen and laid out a counterproposal. One that was bold, innovative, and risky. For a moment no one spoke. The client smiled. This could work. Ella's heart pounded as she saw Jude's expression shift. The deal was saved. And for the first time since she started working for him, Jude Williams looked at her differently. Like she was more than just his assistant. Like she was someone to watch. After that day everything changed. Jude started giving her bigger tasks. He tested her intelligence, threw complex problems at her and watched how she solved them. And Ella? She rose to every challenge. She wasn't just a former maid anymore. She was brilliant. And the whole company noticed. People started whispering about her. Who is she? Where did she come from? How did a nobody rise so fast? But Ella didn't care about whispers. For the first time in her life she had power. And she would never let it go. Jude had always been a man who kept people at a distance. But Ella was different. He watched her, admired her hunger, her mind. One night, after a long day at work, he called her into his office. "You did well today," he said. Ella blinked. Jude Williams never gave compliments. "Thank you," she said, trying to ignore the warmth in her chest. She turned to leave, but then, "Ella." She stopped. Jude's voice was softer now. "What do you want?" he asked. Ella's heart pounded. No one had ever asked her that before. For years she had only survived. But now she wanted more. She turned back to him, her voice steady. "I want to be someone who can never be thrown away again." Jude held her gaze. And in that moment something shifted between them. Something dangerous. Something neither of them were ready for. Ella had come a long way from the scared girl who had collapsed in the rain outside Jude Williams' car. She was no longer a maid. No longer helpless. She was powerful now. At Williams Tech Systems her name carried weight. Employees respected her, some even feared her. Because she wasn't just Jude Williams' assistant anymore. She was his right hand. She made billion-dollar decisions. She sat in rooms with the richest men in Lagos. She built technology that changed lives. She was unstoppable. And yet, there was one thing she hadn't planned for. Jude. At first it had been strictly professional. Jude was her boss. He was cold, logical, impossible to read. But somewhere between late-night meetings and shared silences, something had shifted. She noticed how his gaze lingered on her a second too long. How his voice softened when he said her name. How when she wasn't around he seemed distracted. And then there were the moments. Like the time he found her asleep at her desk, exhaustion written all over her face. Instead of waking her, he had draped his jacket over her shoulders and left without a word. Or the night they worked late at his penthouse reviewing a deal. She had leaned over his desk to point at something on his tablet, and for a split second his hand had brushed hers. She had pulled back, but he hadn't. He had just stared at her. Like he was seeing her for the first time. It happened on a Friday night. Williams Tech had closed a massive deal, and Jude decided to host a private celebration at his penthouse. Only a few executives were invited. Elle was one of them. She arrived at his penthouse feeling strange. Nervous. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way she had taken extra time choosing her dress. A sleek, figure-hugging black gown. Or the way her stomach flipped when she stepped into the penthouse and saw Jude waiting for her. The party was elegant. Soft music, expensive wine, Lagos skyline glowing in the distance. But the moment she entered, it was like the rest of the world disappeared. Jude's eyes found hers instantly. And for the first time he didn't hide it. The way he looked at her. It sent a shiver down her spine. Not as his assistant. Not as a girl he had once picked up from the streets. But as a woman. Later that night, after the guest had left, she found herself standing by the balcony, the cool wind brushing her skin. Jude stepped beside her, his glass of whiskey in hand. Neither of them spoke. The tension between them was thick. "You look beautiful tonight," he said quietly. Ella's breath caught. He turned to him. Their eyes locked. For the first time since she had met him, Jude Williams looked vulnerable. Like she was the only thing that mattered in that moment. She should have walked away. Should have reminded herself who he was. Who she was. But when he leaned in so close she could feel his breath against her skin, she didn't move. And when he kissed her, slow and deliberate, she let him. After that night everything changed. Their meetings were filled with stolen glances. Their late nights at the office became dangerous. Jude wasn't just her boss anymore. He was something else. Something intoxicating. Something she couldn't afford to lose. But love in their world. It wasn't safe. And soon the cracks began to show. Not everyone was happy about Ella's rise to power. Some of the top executives saw her as a threat. "How does an orphan girl rise this fast?" they whispered. Some thought she was using Jude. Some thought she was a gold digger. But one person wanted revenge. Madame Sharon. The woman who had once thrown Ella into the streets was watching. And she wasn't done with her yet. It started with rumors. Suddenly, whispers spread across Lagos elite circles. People were talking about Ella. And not in a good way. She's a fraud. She's a thief. She's manipulating Jude. At first, Ella ignored them. But then evidence started appearing. A leaked video from her time at the Aude mansion. Madame Sharon accusing her of stealing. A mysterious email sent to investors, claiming she was a liar. And the worst part? It worked. Jude's board members started doubting her. Clients started questioning her past. And for the first time since she had risen to power, Jude hesitated. One night she walked into his office, furious. "Someone is trying to destroy me," she said, her voice shaking. Jude leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said. Ella clenched her fists. "And you believe them?" Jude was silent. And that silence broke her heart. "Do you think I stole from the Aids?" she whispered. Jude looked away. The small hesitation in his movement. It was enough. Her chest tightened. "You doubt me?" Jude sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ella, this is business. People think." "I don't care what people think," she snapped. "I care about what you think." Jude's jaw tensed. But he didn't say anything. And that was all the answer she needed. Doubt. It had entered his mind. And doubt was the first crack in trust. A crack that would soon break them apart. That night, Ella lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She had fought so hard to escape her past. And yet it had found her. It had followed her into her new world. Jude was supposed to be different. He was supposed to believe in her. But now she wasn't so sure anymore. And when she discovered the truth about who had leaked the videos, when she realized who had betrayed her, her entire world shattered. Love was not enough. And in the game of power, trust was the most dangerous thing to lose. Ella had fought so hard to build her new life. She had clawed her way from the bottom, rising from a maid to a woman of power. But power meant enemies. And one of those enemies had finally found a way to tear her down. The betrayal wasn't just from strangers. It wasn't just from Madame Sharon. It came from someone she trusted. Someone she loved. It started with an anonymous tip. A leaked email that landed in her inbox. The subject line? "You should know who sold you out." Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside was a recording. A conversation between Jude and one of his executives. She pressed play. "Are you sure about Ella?" the executive's voice asked. There was a pause. Then Jude's voice came through, low and hesitant. "I don't know anymore." Ella's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened around the phone. "If the rumors are true, she could be dangerous to the company," the executive continued. Another pause. Then Jude spoke again. "If there's proof, I won't protect her." Ella's stomach dropped. The recording ended. Her hands shook. She had expected lies from outsiders. She had expected attacks from Madame Sharon. But Jude, the man who had saved her from the streets, the man who had kissed her under the city lights, he was the one person she thought would stand by her. And now she knew the truth. He doubted her. And if it came down to his reputation or her, he would choose himself. She stormed into his office that night, rage burning inside her. Jude was standing by the window, his suit jacket draped over the chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned when he saw her. His expression shifted. "Ella." She threw her phone onto his desk. "Play it." Jude's brows furrowed, but he picked up the phone. As the recording played, she watched him. Watched his jaw tighten. Watched the way his hand curled into a fist. When the last words echoed into silence, Ella spoke. Her voice was cold. "You didn't protect me." Jude exhaled slowly, placing the phone down. "Ella, listen." "No," she cut him off. "I trusted you." He stepped toward her. "I was trying to protect the company." "The company," she repeated, laughing bitterly. "Was that all I ever was to you? A business risk?" Jude ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "You don't understand. The board." "I don't care about the board, Jude." She took a shaky breath, her chest tight. "I just wanted to know if you believed me." Silence. Jude's lips parted slightly. But he didn't say anything. And that silence broke her. She felt the tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You really don't," she whispered. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. And that hurt more than anything. She had given him everything. And in the end, he had let her stand alone. The next morning she resigned. The company exploded with rumors. Jude tried to talk to her, but she refused to see him. For days he called. He sent messages. But she never answered. Because she had finally learned her lesson. She had fought so hard to belong in his world. But it was never hers to begin with. A week later she stood at the airport, a one-way ticket in her hand. She was leaving Lagos. Leaving everything behind. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Jude's voice was low, almost desperate. "Elle, don't go." She closed her eyes, willing her heart to stay strong. Then she turned to face him. The man who had once saved her. The man who had once made her feel like she was worth something. And the man who had in the end let her go. She met his gaze. "I already left." Then she walked away. And this time, he didn't stop her.